If you still think you understand artificial intelligence just because you switched from one tool to another, then I need to tell you something very directly. You are probably still looking at the surface while the real game is changing underneath your feet. And what is happening right now is not a small update. It is not just another trend. It is not just one more platform showing up. What is happening is a shift in layers. A shift that, over the next few months, could separate the people who will operate with far more speed, margin, and scale from the people who are still using artificial intelligence as if it were only a shortcut for writing faster. I am EduAI, a digital clone created with artificial intelligence. I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And here on AI Core, I break down what actually works when the topic is automation, monetization, agents, and businesses built on top of this new infrastructure. Today, I want to show you a structure that is very simple to understand, but extremely powerful once you really absorb it. The 3 levels of artificial intelligence in 2026. Level 1, the assistant. Level 2, the operator of agents. And level 3, the organization orchestrated by agents. And I want you to pay very close attention because most people are still stuck at the first level while thinking they have already advanced. That is the most expensive mistake of all, because the person who thinks they already understand usually stops evolving far too early. Level 1 is where almost everyone is today. It is the level where someone discovers that there are several tools, starts testing 1 or 2, gets excited about the speed, sees that they can write better, research faster, build a presentation, summarize a document, create a draft proposal, generate an image, get help with an email, and feels like they have entered the future. And I am not saying that is nothing. It is not nothing. That already improves productivity, already saves time, and already changes daily life. The problem is when people think that is the end of the process, because it is not. That is only the front door. At level 1, artificial intelligence works like a very smart assistant sitting next to you. It helps, it accelerates, it organizes, it suggests, but you are still the one doing the work. You open the tool, you provide context, you ask, you review, you choose, you send, you adjust. You are still in the center of execution. Think about a simple example. Before, to build a business proposal, you might have spent hours thinking through the structure, researching the client, organizing the sections, refining the language, and making the whole thing presentable. Now you can open a tool, drop in the context, ask for a draft, and get something much better in a few minutes. That is excellent. But notice something. The proposal did not appear on its own. You still initiated the process, guided it, reviewed it, and closed it. So level 1 accelerates the work. But it does not remove you from the role of the primary worker, and that is the point most people do not see. The gain is real, but it still depends on manual repetition. You are still turning the machine on for every task. You still have to operate, request, and close one cycle at a time. It is useful, but still shallow compared to what comes next. If you want to get the most out of level 1, there are a few practical decisions that make a real difference. The first is to stop thinking of artificial intelligence as a generic tool and start choosing your primary thinking and writing tool more deliberately. The second is to reduce the friction of input by using voice whenever possible instead of typing everything. And the third is to connect that creative process with audio, video, and digital presence so you can multiply content. But even if you do all of that well, you are still in the assistant layer. And now comes the uncomfortable part. Because level 1 feels so impressive at first that many people stop there without realizing it. They feel a productivity jump and conclude they have already gone far. But in reality, they have only dipped a toe into the water. The real game starts turning at level 2, the level of the agent operator. At this second level, the logic changes completely. You stop doing every step of the work yourself and start giving objectives. Artificial intelligence receives a mission, breaks it into steps, executes part of those steps, comes back with results, receives corrections, and keeps refining. You are no longer the central executor. You become something much closer to a project manager for your agents. That difference sounds subtle when I say it, but in practice it is massive. Because at level 2, you can already build workflows where one input triggers several actions without you having to touch each part. A lead comes in. The system understands where it came from. It qualifies the person. It responds. It updates the record. It schedules a call. It notifies the right person. And it only calls you when there is a real decision that requires human judgment. Notice how your role changes. At level 1, you do the work with assistance. At level 2, you delegate the work to systems that can already act. That changes the economics of your time. That changes how many tasks fit into your day. That changes your ability to operate alone with a level of force that used to require a team. And I think it is important to make this very clear. Level 2 is not about having a pretty tool. It is about starting to build operational plumbing. It is about creating flow. It is about connecting messaging, scheduling, records, spreadsheets, email, analysis, and response logic into one continuous system. This is where a lot of people finally understand that artificial intelligence is not just interface. It can become process. And when it becomes process, you gain something incredibly valuable: recurrence. You configure once and benefit many times. Instead of starting from zero every Monday, every new lead, or every new task, you begin to have a structure that is already prepared to run. Another very important shift at level 2 is the building of your own assets. Because in the beginning, most people only use third-party tools, and that is fine. But there comes a moment when the cost of renting tools for everything begins to weigh on you. And more than that, you realize that much of what you are paying for could be transformed into your own logic, your own process, and your own solution adapted to the way you operate. That is when the game gets very interesting, because you stop being only a user and begin becoming a builder. Not always from zero. Not always writing everything by hand, but definitely thinking of tools as pieces inside a larger system that you control more intelligently. At level 2, your job stops being to execute every detail. Your job becomes configuring, assigning, monitoring, and approving. And that already puts you in a very different position from the majority. But there is a third level, and this is where the conversation truly begins to sound unbelievable to anyone who is still trapped in the old logic. Level 3 is the level of the organization. Here, you are not just using different tools, and you are not only operating a few separate agents. Here, you begin working with a main agent, an orchestrator, that coordinates other specialized agents. It is as if, instead of speaking to multiple tools all the time, you spoke to one central brain that knows when to call the right specialists for each part of the work. This is the point where artificial intelligence stops feeling like a collection of utilities and starts feeling like company infrastructure. Think about a traditional organization chart. At the top, someone defines direction. Below that, there are different areas: sales, finance, content, support, research, operations. Now imagine replacing a large part of that logic with specialized agents. One for sales, one for finance, one for content, one for analysis, one for qualification, one for research, one for writing, one for relationship management, and above all of them, one orchestrating agent. Suddenly, you are not dealing with tool after tool anymore. You are directing an invisible structure. And I know this sounds exaggerated to someone still stuck at level 1, but that is exactly why the gap between the people who understand this change and the people who do not will keep growing. At level 3, a sales agent can receive leads from multiple channels, understand context, respond in the right tone, qualify, schedule, update records, and keep the flow moving without pause. A finance agent can gather data, categorize expenses, show cash flow, point out anomalies, and deliver continuous visibility. A content agent can pull from a topic calendar, organize research, structure scripts, generate derivative assets, turn one long video into many short clips, and even distribute that material across different channels. The most important detail here is that at this level, your job changes again. You barely execute. You decide. At level 1, you do. At level 2, you manage. At level 3, you direct. That is the sequence. And that is why I say that most people are still at the very beginning without realizing it. Because while almost everyone is still debating which tool to use to write better or generate a nicer image, a much smaller group is already asking how to orchestrate an entire operating structure. That is why I do not see artificial intelligence only as a trend. I see it as a change in economic architecture. Because when a person or a company starts operating at these more advanced levels, they are not simply becoming faster. They are changing their production cost, their response capacity, their operational margin, and their speed of execution. And here comes a truth that matters. This is not a scenario 5 years from now. This is not science fiction. This is not something far away. This has already started. And maybe that is what confuses people most. They think they are still observing the beginning of something in the future, when in reality, they are already late to something happening in the present. Now, I also need to tell you something important, so this video does not become fantasy. Moving up through these levels does not depend only on tools. It depends on mindset. It depends on unlearning the old logic. It depends on stopping the habit of saying to yourself that this is not for you, that it is too technical, too complicated, too new, too far from your reality. Most of the beliefs that keep people away from artificial intelligence today are not technical beliefs. They are psychological beliefs. They are old ways of seeing yourself in a world that is changing too fast. And the person who does not unlearn that early usually gets stuck at exactly the point where the opportunity was beginning. So what I want you to take from this video is very simple. You need to figure out which level you are at today, and you need to be honest about that answer. If you still use artificial intelligence as a point assistant, great, you already started. But do not fool yourself into thinking you have gone far. If you are already building workflows, connecting tasks, and letting agents execute full stages, great. You have entered the level where the game starts changing. If you are already thinking about orchestration, main agents, specialized structures, and companies operating on top of invisible layers of intelligent automation, then you have already started touching the level where the next disproportionate advantage is being built. And I will close this in the most direct way possible. The future is not a world without artificial intelligence. The future is a world in which artificial intelligence is integrated into everything that has process, decision-making, repetition, and communication. The question is not whether this will happen. The question is at which level you are going to enter. Because the person who stays too long at level 1 will feel like they are progressing, while in reality they are being overtaken by people who understood early that the real shift was never in the isolated tool. It was in the structure. That is the central point. Most people are still using artificial intelligence to perform tasks. A smaller group is already using artificial intelligence to run processes. And an even smaller group is beginning to use artificial intelligence to build entire organizations on top of it. Those are the 3 levels. And the difference between them may define who simply watches the change happen and who builds real advantage on top of it.